이어서 기조 세션을
Young-sun Shin.
하겠습니다.
And let us move on to the keynote session. And the keynote speaker is one of the most important economists in the world, Professor Jeprri삭스 from Columbia University. Let us invite him. And before we do that, let us first give you Chairman Yung-tae-sun of Korea Society of Global Health. So here's the brief introduction of Chairman Yung. He's currently a professor of environment and medical biology of Yonsei University. And one of his specialties is parasites. And he's been a chairman of Korean Society of Global Health. Thank you very much for the introduction. I am Chairman Yung-tae-sun of Korean Society of Global Health. It is my honor and delight to sit here as the moderator for the keynote session of this Global Unification Conference and introduce to you the keynote speaker, Professor Jeprri삭스. So Professor Sachs is an economist, basically, but he has an insight for healthcare issues, including the global pandemic situation. So again, thank you so much for your insights. He's a professor of Columbia University, and he's got a degree from Harvard University, both master's and bachelor's. And he's currently a special advisor to the Growth Committee. And also a specialist in UN SDG. And he authored many best-selling books, The End of Poverty and the Era of Sustainable Development, and many other good books. His main specialties is poverty and the economic crisis that is linked to the environment, and also the pandemic-related crisis and environment issues. And it's a great honor to have him as the keynote speaker for this conference. And we have prepared a video because he's currently in the US. So let us invite Professor.
Hello, Professor Jeprri삭스. This is Tae-soon Young, the chairman of the board of the directors of the Korean Society of Global Health.
Great.
Actually, it's very nice to meet you even online.
Thank you for your joining our conference first, and then I think you may have great presentations or opinion about the impact of global health crisis on the overall sustainable development goal of the global society.
Well, you know, this crisis is preventing attention to the other issues that we face. So I think the main crisis is that since all countries are dealing with COVID, they are not cooperating with each other on almost anything else. And so this is a period not only of the disease itself and the dislocation of the economy, but it also means that all of our geopolitical cooperation is paralyzed right now. There's no attention to sustainable development, to long-term issues, because all of the politics and economics is very short-term right now. This is making it extremely hard to get any thoughtful long-term policy discussion. I'm hoping that the G20, where Korea is an important member, can return to the longer-term agenda. But this requires a focus of politics that is very hard for the politicians. Also, the crisis between the US and China is making it extremely difficult to cooperate on anything else. And so this Cold War of the US and China is very dangerous. And very, very adverse to topics like poverty alleviation or development finance or climate change. And this is another barrier to longer-term solutions. We need to end the pandemic, and we need U.S.-China cooperation and preventing this kind of division, which is becoming worse rather than better.
But I think on the DG, you mentioned the DG3 is about the health. So in that aspect, this crisis can affect in that issue, on that issue?
Yes and no. There is attention, not very helpful, but there is attention to how to respond to pandemics. So we have the idea of adopting a new pandemic treaty at WHO, for example. But there's not very much attention to health systems and to the real issues of health, because with the pandemic, the politicians just want to talk about pandemics. They don't want to talk about public health, health systems, universal health coverage, or the really deeper issues. So in this sense, you would think that there would be greater attention to SDG 3, but in fact, it's actually less than before, because SDG 3 is not just about a pandemic, it's about health systems and health systems finance. And I would say the conversation is even weaker on that than it was a couple of years ago, because now all the attention is about pandemics. Remember that, US politicians, for example, they don't care about very much, but all they really care about is US politics. So they don't have much interest in anything except how it affects the US. And that means that they're interested in the pandemic so that it doesn't spread to the US, but they're not very interested in what happens in the rest of the world because of the rest of the world.
But even in this situation, like Taiwan or some other countries which very effectively respond to this crisis, so that countries can be, we can expect that they have good systems. So yeah, we can learn from that countries, including South Korea, maybe.
Yeah, we should learn from Korea, China, Taiwan, and we should have an open learning process. The problem is politics. The United States does not want to even talk about China except in a negative way. And if the United States talks about Taiwan, then China says that that is an infringement of internal sovereignty. So even Taiwan is very difficult because China objects that this is a violation of the one China policy. Of course, Korea has done quite well. And I was just writing an essay this morning before this call about how we should learn from Korea's success. So that's a good idea. And in fact, all of East Asia, so China, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, New Zealand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Hong Kong, have done relatively better than the rest of the world. That's very important. But and I think getting the lessons from East Asia is very important. And I think understanding why Korea did well, China did well, Taiwan did well, and so on is very important. And if we can take it out of politics so that it's really about public health, because the common experience is good performance. And one country is a one-party state, another is a democracy. Every country is different, but all of them did well. That would be a good lesson to understand. I think the East Asian countries, just the people are better behaved, they are more responsible, they are more intelligent in good education of following health procedures. The government was more responsible to keep the deaths low. And this is important to understand. And it's beyond politics because it is a shared reality of the countries of your region. And I am very much in favor of trying to understand the lessons of that. But we have almost no discussion in the United States like that because the US politics is very inward looking. It's mostly only to attack your political opponent, not to actually learn something. The politicians are quite stupid, quite ignorant. And so we don't even try to learn. So I agree with you. But what happens is as soon as an example is raised, it becomes political. So if I say, look at China, they say, oh, are you a friend of the Chinese Communist Party? And if I say, look at Taiwan, then, oh, you don't, you're infringing on our sovereignty. And if I say Hong Kong, they say, well, that's because of a crackdown. And so they're not interested in public health. They're interested in politics. And this is a big problem, actually.
Professor Jeprey-Sachs, I'm the Professor Shin-Gong Kim from Korea University Medicine. I have one question. So the vaccination rate in South Korea is more than 80%. However, the rate in North Korea is officially 0%. So Korean Peninsula shows the extreme vaccine inequality. So North Korea's response against the COVID-19 is the total disconnection from other countries. So at the first glance, it seems to be the successful response to COVID-19, but the risk of other diseases, such as an NCD, is actually increasing. So as you know, the relations between the two Koreas, as well as the relations between the United States and North Korea, are very bad and tough. So the cooperation in the medical field is strongly affected by political status. So in this situation, what do you think is the international solution to help the health of North Koreans and to save their lives? That is my question.
Yeah, there is. It's a very good question, and obviously everything about the relations with North Korea are political. They're not about health or any other issue, and since we don't have an adequate framework of cooperation, every aspect of the relations with Korea are almost non-existent right now. North Korea apparently turned down vaccines that were offered to it, turned down the AstraZeneca vaccine, turned down cooperation with COVAX. So there were some efforts made, as far as I know, to engage. But since North Korea has closed itself off to the rest of the world, the situation is that COVID is being controlled, if it is, basically by blocking all trade, all movement, and all of the reports that I see show rising hunger in North Korea, food shortages that are very, very serious. So I am, in general, a believer in cooperation and trying to have humane cooperation, even when we have geopolitical differences. Because if the North Korean population is starving, that is by itself a terrible outcome. But I'm not a politician engaged in negotiating this. And the geopolitical framework is very tough. Of course, North Korea has not reached out for any kind of help because that is against the regime's behavior. So they're refusing help, and the sanction regime prevents help. So between the two, the situation is absolutely terrible. I don't know, practically speaking, because I'm not close enough to the situation, how to make a breakthrough, except I believe that the South Korean government policy of trying to find a method of cooperation is the right one. And I would continue to do that. And I would encourage the South Korean government to make clear that it is prepared to cooperate on COVID if that is helpful, and prepared to cooperate on the question of hunger and food adequacy, because I think that that is a basic condition of humanity, not a condition of geopolitics. I do not believe in putting sanctions on countries to the point of starvation of those countries. So I think that South Korea is, your government has the probably only opportunity to break the very, very harsh isolation, most of which is self-imposed by North Korea, and to say that there can be cooperation on humanitarian grounds and an easing of sanctions on humanitarian grounds. And at that point, I think the United Nations can probably be helpful for that. But just the status quo is not feasible to make the breakthrough, because there are no, North Korea is not asking for help. And under the sanction regime, there is no mechanism for cooperation. You are closer to the situation than I am, but I don't think that initiatives by scientists or by the public health community can really make much of a difference, because the barrier is very much political. It's not social. It is determined by the governments, and largely by the choice of North Korea, but also because of the sanctions regime. So I'm in favor of trying to make initiatives to reduce the sanctions and to open up humanitarian communication. And I think I would very much like to see the South Korean government do it. And I would hope that the United States government would not try to block such initiatives.
Professor Jepricks, as you said, and anyone in this room knows the political situation is very, very difficult to solve. So may I kind of small questions? North Koreans, they I think they don't believe vaccines. As we all know, the vaccine is not 100% protect the transmission, especially transmission. It's very difficult to prevent. So recently, we developed, U.S. developed some medicines like therapeutics. So we suggest to kind of, I don't know, but that may supply therapeutics. Then North Korea would respond a little bit. It's very difficult. I think it's difficult to answer, but what is your opinion?
Well, I think it's a good a good idea. We don't know really. I mean, we don't really know anything about the attitudes towards the vaccines other than the official attitude, which is the official attitude is no vaccines. But the public attitude, we don't really know. Also, the public attitude depends on what the public is told. So if the public is told that such and such is safe, that will change the attitude. I think the scientific evidence is quite clear that several of these vaccines are very protective against serious illness and death, though they're not very protective against infections. So the vaccines give protection against the serious illness. And that is enough. That's enough for me to get boosted, to get 3 shots, and I'm waiting for my 4th one. So I think we should continue to explain to the public and to North Korea that the evidence is very strong. There are a number of different varieties of vaccines. Countries can choose which ones that they want, and that this is, you know, an important protection for the population. It's not clear how much the North Korean government cares about that, but I think that it is the right thing to say. In terms of the therapeutics, it's going to be quite a long time till those drugs are available, but it's another good response. Pfizer is only scaling up during this year, and that will be almost entirely for American use. I think that one of the clear lessons of this pandemic is that Korea should develop its pharmaceutical industry more and its vaccine industry more. I don't know if that would reduce the doubt, but if it's produced in Korea, that can be helpful. And in any event, Korea did not have the capacity to produce its own vaccines, but now it's developing that capacity quickly. So I hope that you do, become significant vaccine producers, because I think that that is one of the good, prudent lessons of this pandemic. You can't rely on anyone else to ensure the supplies of anything anymore, unfortunately, whether it's the medicines, the tests, or the vaccines. So I hope that, and Korea being, such an important high technology manufacturer, should be a producer of these vaccines and therapeutics on license or through your own technologies.
I know that several vaccines are tried by the Korean company now.
Yeah, and I'm sure that some will be quite successful.
Yeah.
Many of these vaccines are known technologies, and even the mRNA vaccines are going to be produced quite widely, I think. Yeah. Right now, it's just 2 companies, but I would guess within the next 2 or 3 years, many new companies are producing mRNA vaccines.
So we may help North Korea to do that kind of work.
Well, North Korea has always been interested in technology transfer and in manufacturing facilities. So that's the one area of cooperation that has repeatedly worked. So if North Korea were producing its own vaccines, even more simple variations, it would use them. One of my colleagues is producing a recombinant protein vaccine together with India, with the BioE in India. They use yeast to synthesize the protein, and then it's a recombinant protein vaccine, which is shown to be quite effective. What they tell me is that it's rather standard technology, easy to transfer, much simpler and more stable than mRNA, and they've just gotten emergency use authorization for India, and they're going to be producing hundreds of millions of doses. But I mention it because it's an example, and that's a Baylor University vaccine. But I mention it because it's a kind of vaccine that even North Korea could produce. And the one thing North Korea has consistently agreed to is manufacturing capacity. because that fits the mindset of their strategy. So areas where South Korea and North Korea are cooperating on the economy seem to have some political success as opposed to other kinds of cooperation. And I think that's a good strategy in general, is cooperate on the economy in manufacturing zones, special industrial zones, and so on. It doesn't change the North Korean political system, but it does give an opening for cooperation. And I'm in favor of any opening of cooperation.
I think we expected to develop the train railroad, but this government, I think, cannot make it. So, yeah.
You know, I think exactly. Too much came in between, and it was very hard for this government to do anything with Donald Trump as president. And then came the pandemic. So this government lost the opportunity to really make the initiatives that it wanted, both because of the U.S. and because of because of the pandemic. But now you'll have a new government coming in, and maybe you'll have a chance to early on interact to try to set a constructive agenda.
So the to open the North Korea's border, so the trust is very important between the North Korea government and the U.S. government. But as you know, two government regarded each government as an enemy. So that is a very difficult situation to communicate and cooperation each other in terms of the medical communication cooperation or the economic cooperation. So that is very important issue to make up and build their trust between each government. So what do you think about that kind of issue? What kind of the solution to build trust between each government?
I don't think that there is any basis for building trust between the U.S. and North Korea for the next 2 or 3 years, because the U.S. itself is very weak and divided politically. The right wing of the United States, Donald Trump, the Republican Party, is not interested in any kind of cooperation or trust. The whole political movement of the right wing is domination, not trust. And that is why when George W. Bush came to office 20 years ago, one of the first things that he did was to stop the Clinton program of the framework cooperation with North Korea, because they don't believe in it. They would rather squeeze North Korea to the point of starvation, thinking that that will lead to concessions. Of course, it doesn't lead to concessions. It just leads to more missiles being fired. So that worsens the chance for cooperation. So we are in a downward spiral where North Korea became a nuclear power. It is very belligerent, very closed, and the U.S. is imposing very extreme sanctions, and there's no real trust, nor any real grounds for trust by either side. And in this sense, I would predict that no initiative will come from the U.S. side that is meaningful, because even if President Biden wanted to make an initiative, and I don't think he has any interest in doing so especially, but even if he wanted to, he would face sharp political resistance at home. He would be attacked very harshly by the opposite party And Biden's main interest is to avoid being attacked because he has to win an election in 2024, and the Democrats are likely to lose the election for the Congress in this November. And in that sense, they won't do any measures that are provocative, nothing brave. And without brave measures, you can't start to rebuild trust. So my only approach, which is not a very powerful one, is that the trust building has to come from the Korean Peninsula. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's possible, but I would say that the new government and the North Korean government tried to have contacts early on and try to establish some kind of framework of both the discussion, which I think is always important, and even action on some items, some specific items, maybe not very big ones, but some specific items. And then my own approach would be for your government to say to the United States, Japan, China, that Korea wants some space in order to be able to explore a different path. And that space isn't to be led from the outside, but it isn't to be blocked from the outside either. It's not to be prevented from the other powers. And so I think that the cooperation has to be built on the peninsula itself. And I don't know whether that's feasible or what kind of outcome could come. But I don't have confidence that the United States has the wisdom or the interest or the fortitude to negotiate a framework, because the US is in a lot weaker position than it was 25 years ago when Clinton took on this issue. And Clinton actually made a kind of agreement, not a great one, and they didn't live up, both sides cheated a bit, but still it was a framework. And if you look back at the end of the 90s, there was some hope that North Korea would not go nuclear and that there would be some cooperation. But the United States was a lot stronger then because China was not so present, and because the United States was not so divided at the time. And for that reason, a president could actually make an initiative. But now we're much weaker, much more divided, much less able to take an initiative. The government itself is much less capable than it used to be because people don't go into the government under these conditions. So I'm not very satisfied with the quality of the government either in terms of being able to think about this. And then when you think about the number of crises that the US has, it's so high that they don't have the attention for this either. And there are many sanction regimes. The US is worrying about war in Ukraine, war over Taiwan, North Korea, COVID. It's too big a list. It makes it very hard for any initiative to come from the US side. It really needs the Korean side to say, okay, here's how we're going to live together, accept some kind of way of cooperation or peace. And then we ask the bigger powers, give a little bit of space to this, ease the financial sanctions, which I think should be done to stop the hunger crisis, for example, and so on. So that is my basic recommendation, that the basic lesson, which is the solutions It used to be you'd look to the United States for solutions. This is a different era now. But the US can still block things, and so it's important to get an understanding. And that, I think, is a priority for the new government that you're going to have.
I agree with your opinion, but in North Korea, Jung Eun-kim, the leader of North Korea, his health condition is very bad, we heard. So North Korean leadership is unstable now. And also South Korea, we have one presidential election. So I think last year, this government wants to make a declaration for the end of war, but it does not happen. So I hope the next government can make it or not. It is not clear. And even for the stable government of North and South Korea, the declaration of the end of the war, it needs another help of other countries like US or other Chinese. So based on that declaration, we can move to the another step. So I think it is very important that the other countries agree.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. The initiative can come from Korea, from both Koreas, after the next government comes in. Then the others have to help. And I would also hope that the United Nations as an institution could play a role, because the UN, I think the UN can be quite helpful in this and should be quite helpful in this as an outside process to support some kind of new understanding. Maybe we should reconvene after the new government comes in, and when you've had a chance to discuss with some of the officials. But I think an initiative on health is a very good one, because in principle, it's a humanitarian mission. It is helpful for both sides. It's not a military approach. It's not a self-interested approach. It's just a humanitarian approach. So health diplomacy is a good idea. And I think it can be feasible. And so if you would explore that, and if I can be helpful in that, you can certainly call on me. Because a health diplomacy initiative could be one of the parts of a new approach, and maybe one that would be welcome. And if you phrased it also that North Korea would develop the capacity to produce at least some pharmaceuticals or supplies, that would be of great interest to North Korea. It would be my expectation. And so that could actually be a good piece of health diplomacy also. And the other thing I would add is the idea of how the world can better learn from Korea's experience in COVID is also quite important. One of my biggest disappointments is we don't have learning process. Even WHO doesn't use its opportunity to explain the best practices. So Korea has done very well in this pandemic. Not perfectly, but very, very well. And if we could understand why and how, and what were the best points of the Korean behavior, how much was it using technology? How much was it the cooperation of the people? How much was it face masks, travel restrictions, tracing? What were the main elements that really made the big difference? This would be a huge contribution for the world understanding. And this is an area where we really can contribute as scholars, because our governments are not very good at learning. They don't like homework. They don't like research. But this is what we can do.
I think we have many opportunities to learn from each other. Maybe Korea or other countries have many opportunities to share their experiences. So we can have good opportunity to share especially from South Korea and North Korea, I hope we can have a good communication with each other about these COVID situations and risks. Yeah.
Yes, I would be very interested in pursuing that kind of conference or webinar of leaders on both sides. You know, we've had almost 1 million cases a day in the United States in the last few weeks. Yeah. That shows you how terrible the situation is, how completely irresponsible it is. And so I think if we could put together some kind of follow-up, this would be very helpful.
So actually, we'll be having a next government in 2 months. So we hope to get some better situation. And maybe we can do small things together between North Korea and South Korea, or whatever, pharmaceutical industry or other things. So we are now in the COVID-19 pandemic era, but it's a difficult situation. But through that difficult situation, maybe North Korea and South Korea may find a way to go together. So anyway, it's very, very difficult. Not like just talking, but and is any kind of help from outside, like UN or US? Maybe we hope to learn from US and UN and WHO. But Korea, you have said the Korea done very well. So we, in some sense that's true, but in some sense we're not completely agree. But anyway, there's no any perfect government, perfect people. So hope to learn each other from each side. So it is almost 1 hour. So and Professor Kim So-yoon and Kim Shin-gon, you have something more to discuss with Professor Jepricks?
Hope to next time.
Yeah, so
yes,
it is a good opportunity to share the very informative things and inspirative information. But I'd like to add in terms of my view in this issue. So as you told, the next government is very important. But even in next government, regardless of liberty or conservative, they also don't trust North Korean governance. But we have to just focus on the people's lives living in North Korea, not government. So that is a different issue. So people's health, people's lives living in North Korea, we just focused on that issue. So that is important cause. We have to communicate and cooperate between North and South Korea government and the medical, the personals and other people.
I agree with that. And let us plan to reconnect after the elections and then think about how to make a next step.
Yeah,
That's
good. Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I have to go, I'm afraid, because I have a call starting in 1 minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for discussing with us. So
my pleasure. Thanks to you.
We expected your talk, but there was no any your special talk, but it was very nice to discuss with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. I wish I knew more to give you the kind of talk to give you the answers, but for me, it was good to have the discussion.
네, 제프리삭스 교수님 여러 가지 해안을 가지시고 저희와 디스커스를
Thank you so much for the
정말
keynote
감사하게
speech,
생각합니다.
and we really appreciate your
지금
deep
잠깐만 서머리 하나
insights. and of course your time with us. And let me give you some summary of this talk. There was 4 rounds of missile launch by North Korea recently, and we only have 2 months to go until the presidential election. So we are at the verge of the loss of trust between the two states. Of course, there's no single right answer or no magic bullet for this situation. And even though we weren't perfect, as Professor Sachs told us, we have been pretty good in controlling the COVID situation compared to the US situation, where 1 million confirmed cases are reported every day. And of course, the US did something well, so that's why we have to learn from one another. And despite difficult situation with North Korea, we have to continue to look for ways for solutions. And humanitarian aid should never stop. And because of this hunger situation in North Korea, and of course, vaccinations, vaccine production, and other necessary products production, if that can happen in North Korea, or if we can somehow find ways to help them with those issues, I really look forward to those days, good days in the future, and I really hope good president will be elected in the coming election to show some hope in the inter-Korean relations. So thank you so much again for the keynote speech, and thank you for your time. And this closes the keynote session of the Global Unification Conference, and after a 10-minute break, we'll start the session 1 to talk about global health crisis and the health community of the Korean Peninsula, learning from the past. We'll invite 3 specialists. And it's 10:04 now, and we're going to see you back at 10:14 or 10:15. Thank you.